Yeah, so I know it's a little bit different than the normal way we do things around here. So that's why I just kind of jumped in to make sure that you all get to hear a little bit more as we go in depth into how you use data. So Gene gave us a great breakdown of how using that data is directly improving customer experience at the airports. Now we're going to dig in a little bit more into how you structure the data, how you collect it, how you organize it, how you secure it. I'll really get into the nitty-gritty of how that data is collected and used. And to join us in that conversation, we also have Andy from the US Digital Service. So before we get started, Andy, if you could introduce yourself and tell people what you do.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. As Aaron said, I'm part of the United States Digital Service. We're a group that is a part of the executive branch, and we've been around for about 5 years. We were created by the Obama administration in response to the first rollout of healthcare.gov. So if you recall, it did not really go according to plan. And so the Obama administration recruited a bunch of technology talent from Silicon Valley, and they came to DC for an initial public service tour of duty, and they helped redesign and fix healthcare.gov. And so we continue that nonpartisan mission today. So we have teams of engineers, product managers, designers, and StratOps folks who deploy into agencies and help them modernize their technologies so that their tech infrastructure can power a better customer experience.
So Andy, to get us up to speed on what you're doing and how this fits in, we're here talking about customer experience. It's the CX Summit. And this panel, we're talking about data. So how does data fit into the customer experience? Is it just about figuring out what the pain points are? How are you using data to make improvements?
Sure. So part of my work over the past year and a half has been at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so in the digital space, VA has about 5 top-level websites. And so the simple answer to your question is the data are a mess. They don't tell a complete story, and veterans told us over and over again, mainly through the Veterans Experience Office, which you'll hear later today, that it was confusing to navigate all these different digital properties. So one of our primary goals right now is to consolidate VA's digital product portfolio and the self-service tools that veterans are using so that that data can be more accurate and tell a cleaner story. So we finished the first phase last year. We relaunched va.gov, and we're continuing that consolidation in this year and the next year. On a basic level, it's just looking at measures like click events and user flows into certain tools. And we're piloting new basic metrics like scroll depths on content pages. So when veterans and their family members are looking at content around eligibility, are they actually scrolling down below the fold or the on-screen content and clicking into an online application?
And if everybody's scrolling down, maybe some of that should get bumped up?
That's right. And in government, we have this benefit life cycle. You have the explore phase, determine my eligibility, the apply phase, which generally involves a paper form or a digital form. Then you have the track phase, which is what is my case status? Is the government processing my application? And then manage. And so often in government, the explore content is massive because it's tied to statute, and the eligibility rules are really complex. And so in the digital space and user experience design, what we can do is we can get really creative with the way that we design our pages and make sure that we put our calls to actions and buttons at the top of the page, or we encourage users to create a va.gov account so that we have basic information to then personalize their experience. So we can still meet those kind of standards and rules in government, but get creative with making the user experience better in the digital space.
Excellent. So now, Gene, we'll get you back in the conversation here and bring it all around. So one of the things you mentioned, dirty data, right? That's dirty data, I think, is the bane of any data scientist's existence, because you want to use it, but you don't really know what you're looking at because it's not clean, it's not accurate. Another thing you had mentioned in your talk, Gene, was how you were focusing questions to get deeper into what people really wanted to hear. So I wanted to talk a little bit about p-hacking, right? The idea that if, I retweeted a quote the other day, if you torture data long enough, it will confess to anything, right? So how are you making sure that you're not just making assumptions off of data, but you're actually getting accurate insights out of it?
Yeah, I think one of the ways to do that is to make sure you're getting data from different sources. You would never act upon one specific source. Like we have our customer surveys, and we can see, and you can see trends. You'll be able to see. One of the things I'll notice, we get a pretty good sampling. We get about 600 responses on our survey a month. which for our 2 airports, sometimes a little higher than that, which is about double what you'd see on a normal J.D. Power type survey. So we get a really good sampling. So when you see a pattern, or if you see some outliers, then you know something's wrong. Then you would take a look at your customer comments, see if you're getting the same kind of information, to see if there's a pattern there also. And then also, and then any other sources you're getting from your customers. So I think the key on that is you're going to look for outliers. You're going to look for things that jump out at you, saying, "Well, gee, that's not something we would normally see." And then you really want to dig into those and see if it's happening in a particular area of the airport, a particular category of the customer experience.
Interesting. Danny?
I'm sorry.
So how do you make sure that when you're collecting the data, that the insights that you're gaining out of it aren't just hey, I see, I put a bunch of stuff in a spreadsheet and I made a graph and it looks like this is the answer, when really you have bad data or it's not accurate or you're just making assumptions. Do you have to have an advanced degree in computer science to get actionable insights?
I don't think so. I would say it goes back to the customer journey. So the Veterans Experience Office, which at the Department of Veterans Affairs is responsible for this cross-enterprise customer experience, they do deep research into customer journeys at the VA. So what are all of the touch points that VA has with their customers for a benefit like healthcare? Digital is a very thin layer to that. We have key touch points that we have core competencies in, like applying for healthcare online, managing your healthcare benefits, like refilling your prescription online. We offer all of those things. So in the world of user experience design, we would say, do the data support what the pain points show in this user journey? So are we seeing a drop-off in applications because X? So, yeah.
So then if the data correlates to the feedback you're getting, the written feedback and the experience that you're seeing, then you know you have some confidence in it.
Yeah, and the core question is always like, where do you start? Like enterprises as big as VA has 370,000 employees. They're sitting on mountains and mountains of data. And so we always go back to the customer journey, because that helps us refine the research questions we ask and helps us understand what data would be most valuable in creating solutions for some of those key pain points.
So what's the customer experience look like for you and your teams on the back end? If you're not data scientists, how are you handling just the huge influx you're getting, managing it, picking out the right things that you want to look at, and analyzing this bulk data?
Yeah, well, I have a small team of analysts, actually revenue program managers, but they, so what we do first is we get all the data, and we actually built these dashboards ourselves with our IT team. We designed them first in Excel, basically, and you don't need to be a data scientist to use Excel. So the way I look at it is this way. You want to build a house. The architect has to design the house and make the blueprints. We have to do the blueprints for what we want our dashboards on our business intelligence system to look like. You can't just go to your IT team, who are the experts in this, and tell them, build me a dashboard, build me an intelligence system. That's not going to happen, and nor should it happen that way. So you have to actually design it yourself. So we're really putting the blueprints together. We're like the architects. And then once we hand over those blueprints, because we built all these dashboards manually in Excel first, and then you hand it over. You meet with your IT team, and you say, this is what we need to have built, and then they can build it from there. And they build it in a way that you can go in and see the data in a way that's most useful to you, and then again, most useful to the people in the airports, the customer service teams. And that's really one of the main focuses of making the dashboards visually, to visualize your data. Because you're right, a data analyst can go into the data and they can see, like my team can go in there and they can see what are the high points, what are the low points, what's it telling us. But your people, they're your customer service managers, your people at the airlines, your people doing the concessions, that's not their expertise, so you have to visualize it for them.
Yeah, CX starts at home.
It does, yeah, absolutely.
So what are you doing at VA to make sure that your people, whether they're CX experts, whether they're data experts, whether they're physicians, are able to use this data to improve the customer experience all the way down the line?
Sure. So someone mentioned earlier this morning, the government's full of silos and pockets. So unfortunately, my answer is there's no cross-enterprise data group at VA right now. Which is one of the things I think in government we just have to recognize that's a need. We need an executive in charge of data and data governance across the enterprise.
That the pending chief data officer that all agencies are going to have hopefully will help with some of that.
Yeah. But the individual decisions and the motivations behind why do I need this dashboard, that's really hard to control for. In the digital space, we would have product teams look at data and maybe pull in some folks from a data team that's part of the digital contracts and say, we need you to do some basic modeling so that we can more deeply understand the needs of our users. But connecting that and that small touch point in the customer experience on the VA.gov website to the veterans' healthcare and meeting with their primary care physician, that's a really difficult thing to do. So we're working on it.
Always a work in progress, right?
Yes, absolutely.
You know, someone mentioned before, they were talking about at the airport, the data collection through Wi-Fi, and that made me think of another tangent I'd like to go off on. Consent for collection of data. Let's talk about the different ways in which you're collecting data. There's user feedback forms, which are obviously consent, right? Because they know that they're doing that, right? Someone gets on the Wi-Fi and they agree to the terms of service, which whether they've read them or not, they're consenting to you using their data.
That's exactly right.
Somebody hits the smiley face or the frowny face on the thing, obviously they're consenting. What are ways in which you're collecting data? Are people, I would say, people aren't necessarily consenting when they park, right? They know that there's going to be a data collection, but they're not actively consenting to that. So what are the different avenues in which you're collecting data? This is for both of you. And how are you managing the consent, the anonymization of the data, and that kind of personal security?
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple right there. With the Wi-Fi, they actually consent, and the same thing with the customer feedback. When you do the survey, you don't have to give your email, but we do have a prize every month. Somebody from each airport will win $200 gift card to kind of incent people to take the survey. So then they have to give us their email, because otherwise I can't get in touch with them to send them their gift card. I get nice responses back too when I send them the gift card. But in any event, so for the surveys, then they know they're doing that. For the other data, like the parking data, we don't collect any individual customer data. We're looking at customer segments. So I'm looking at how often people are parking, like the times of the day that people are parking in the garages or in economy. I'm looking at when people come into, whether they use Uber or Lyft, I'm looking at the traffic patterns there. I'm looking at people that do rental cars or things like that. So I'm not looking at individual customers. I get data on each transaction, but I don't know who the customer is. But I can get a picture of the overall customer by looking at those different customer segments.
Right, okay. Now, VA, you've got that problem, plus you're dealing with health information, which is particularly protected. So how are you managing consent and protecting identities?
Yeah, so again, this morning, the Paperwork Reduction Act was mentioned. That was passed by Congress in 1980, and the fundamental rationale behind it is let's minimize the collection of information from the American public. And I find that fascinating almost 40 years later when we're having really deep conversations around privacy and data and what the private sector is doing with our data. So the government has said for 40 years now, we want the bare minimum, and we want the bare minimum because we are making you do something to get a government benefit. We are not marketing VA healthcare. We are asking a veteran to fill out a form to determine his or her eligibility to receive that health care. And so I think that's a good thing. We just should be collecting the bare minimum. PRA still impacts things like intercept surveys like 4C, Medallia, other measurement tools in the digital space. Healthcare is a whole nother beast because there are healthcare regulations. The HHS, Health and Human Services, and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, they've really taken the lead on establishing FHIR standards for interoperability of data. And so for a veteran today, he or she can download all of his or her health information, they call it Blue Button, and just empowering your customer to have access to his or her data is so important. If you log on to some social media platforms that I won't name, getting a hold of your data, what they know about you, is buried 10 or 15 levels deep. And we should not be doing that in the government. You know,
transparency.
It's in your account when you sign on to VA.gov. Download all of my healthcare information. So yeah, it's all over the place. Healthcare is its own kind of special thing. But I think the government just being transparent about what we're doing with the data is our obligation to the public.
So what I heard from both of you in there was that there's no one-size-fits-all rule for how you do this. Can we maybe get a sliding scale, though? How much do you need to know about your customer to improve their experience, about that individual?
I would say there are certain situations we need to know about the individual, but by and large, if you're looking at something like an airport, I'm looking at the trends. I'm looking at the segments and the patterns. I don't, as far as customer comments, if somebody has an individual concern, we just implemented our CRM system using Salesforce. So when customers send comments in, they get directed to the group who's responsible for that. And that's an individual customer. And if it's a parking issue, if it's something to do with concessions, the person responsible for that will respond, and that goes out to them in real time, and we're able to track now to see how they respond to that customer. So the only area where we would actually address the individual customer, if a customer provides us an individual comment, and whether it's a complaint, it's a suggestion, or whether it's a compliment or whatever. The other, I think, is more important to really look at the big picture, to look at the customer holistically, to see what the customer as a whole, what your customers as a whole are telling you about the experience, whether it's good or it's bad. I mean, you learn from things that they're telling you that they want to improve. You also learn from things that you're doing well in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so rare that you get positive feedback in the internet age.
It is, and we do get some, but you're right. Because generally the people are going to take the effort to write something, have a concern.
Right.
And what we do too is we combine suggestions and complaints into one category. Because our thought is, if somebody's making a suggestion, well, they don't like the way you're doing something, they want you to improve upon it.
Presumably, yeah. So you heard it here. If you have a specific anger, complaint, direct it toward Gene. He wants to hear about it.
There you go.
He wants your bio. What about at VA? What's that sliding scale of how much you need to know individual customers versus how much you look at the group?
Yeah. So in the digital space, we're in the very, very, very early phases of personalization. I'm sure for all enterprises and organizations, personalization is one of the key tenets of their customer experience and how they prioritize their resources. So as I mentioned, VA has mountains of data. There are hundreds of databases across the Veterans Healthcare Administration, the Benefits Administration, and the cemeteries and memorials. And the question is, what do you do with it? So with our initial kind of beta personalization online, we can look for patterns, as Gene mentioned. It's a really good starting point. So if we know that veterans in a certain age group are more likely to apply for GI Bill benefits, we will surface the application to get GI Bill benefits and compare different colleges and universities. So really, really granular, or excuse me, really, really simple. One of the things that's unique about VA and the veteran experience is so much of it happens in person, and a lot of it is tied to service design. And again, the Veterans Experience Office will share more later this morning, but there's a lot of variability in that experience. VA in the healthcare space alone has over 1,200 hospitals and health clinics, and they all have their own budgets and their own contracts in place, and in many cases, some of their own systems for collecting feedback and responding to their customer needs. And so it's just really hard to control at the enterprise level.
Yeah, can I follow up on that real quick?
Of course, yeah.
One of the things we use to look at the overall individual customers, we look at the customer segments. One of the things we can do to help increase our revenue and to help our customers, we can look and say, all right, how many customers are coming from particular zip codes? How long does it take to drive to that zip code? How much would it cost taking an Uber or Lyft? How much would it cost if they parked, if they spent a certain number of days? So if we actually use that to offer discounts to customers, to say, if you're going to stay 4 more days longer, and we target those particular zip codes where we can actually say, if we give a 20 or 30% discount, we can have a price that's competitive with Uber and Lyft, but then the customers would be parking at the airport also. And bottom line is, it helps us, it helps the customer.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. So I've got another question for these gentlemen in an area that they are presumably not experts, so we'll get to that in a second. And then I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions, so start thinking about what you want to ask. So I want to talk about cybersecurity. Presumably neither of you are cybersecurity experts. Most data scientists are data scientists, not cybersecurity experts. So as you're collecting all of this data, some of it incredibly personal and sensitive, how are you focused on security on your end versus how much of it do you just push off to your security folks and say, hey, just make sure this stuff's secure so I don't have to worry about it?
Yeah. Well, I'll say I do work rely on our IT team. They do use the state-of-the-art security. That's the best security available. Now, we don't, other than the zip codes and the email addresses, from a customer experience perspective, we don't have any PII unless somebody gives it to us in the comments. Now, how that is, and then that doesn't go into our business intelligence system. I mean, anything in the business intelligence system just has the overall view of the customers. So the bottom line here, we do kind of rely on our IT team. We work with them. They assure us. Anything, if you do parking on our airports and you pay in advance or the credit card, that's done through a third party. They're all PCI compliant. So we don't hold any credit card data or any financial data from our customers. So that's one way that we could help to make sure that we don't have any issues with that.
Thanks, sir.
Okay.
For VA, I'd like to reframe it slightly because you have these different levels of data, right? You have everything from just basically, did you thumbs up or thumbs down, like or not, to the most sensitive information a person that you can have on a person. So when you're working with the data, do you filter some of that extra sensitive stuff through to make sure that, while it's sensitive, it's extra secure, and then you can anonymize it? How do you get it into the hands of your data scientists in a way that they can use it and work with it and not have to worry about all those levels of security?
Well, I think the government's always done a good job of scrubbing data sets of PII before they even start working with it. And that, again, has been around for decades. So I think that's a good thing. In general, open source tools. So this is counterintuitive, but we're helping at the digital service the government move to the cloud. And what the cloud enables is, besides just backups of data and information, industry best practices and standards for that security. And so when you have enterprise vendors like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, who are your vendors for storing your customer data, they will be sending patches and security updates all the time, right? Because the vulnerabilities are going to increase as our world continues to become increasingly complex. So the open source tools, because in the open source community, as a principle, you have a global community of engineers and experts all working together on this platform versus proprietary. So much of VA's legacy technology in the government is proprietary. They made it themselves, and there are a lot of vulnerabilities when you don't maintain that infrastructure. So that's a simple answer, but I think it's a pretty good one, especially in the government.
It is a good one.
Just stay up to date with your technologies and your infrastructure.
Yeah. Excellent. I've got more weedy questions about collection and databases and all that stuff, but let's open it up to the audience here, and we're going to start with a gentleman who I interrupted so rudely before.
Yes, Gene, I have a question for you.
Sure.
In your previous presentation, you talked about data repository. How does an organization identify the best data repository for their organization?
That's a great question. One of the things we looked at, our IT team did market research on that. They looked at a number of them, because where it starts is what we need. What we need as the user, as the people who are going to analyze the data, who are going to use the data. So we work with them. We give them our, tell them what type of way we'd like to see it. They went out there and they did a lot of market research for us. They said we have a great IT team there. They looked at a number of different tools. They came up with ClickSense. Again, I'm not advocating one or the other. I've used Tableau, which is very good too. We wanted to look at something that, number one, will be able to visualize the data, very easy to use, and you could automate the data to get it, because all that data goes in automatically and nothing is manually input in there now, and something that you could send out to different areas of the company that they could very easily look at and find useful in their everyday work. Does that help?
That automation, I imagine, goes to that last question, right, about how do you anonymize people. If you just keep that automated, you don't have to worry about seeing stuff you're not supposed to see.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anything you wanted to add about finding the right repositories?
I don't have anything to add, but I do want to say something about a different agency that we've done some work at, which is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So they are using machine learning. They spun up a big data team to look at processing times for immigration benefits. So it takes many months and sometimes years to process things like a green card renewal and citizenship applications. And so again, they've been sitting on the data for years. So once they streamlined their case processing, right, the software on the back end where immigration service officers adjudicate immigration cases, then they have all this data that tell a story, right? The field office in LA is taking 5 months to process a green card renewal. The field office in New York is taking 2 months. And so what they've done is they've actually personalized it to location of where your case is being processed and to the specific benefit for the user signed into his or her USCIS.gov account. And that's really, really cool. So when you think about the customer experience and business strategy and where are we making investments, we're reducing call center volume because someone's not calling every day to check a case status. You're reducing the burden on the field because there are people who show up in person because they can't get an answer from the government. And you're creating institutional trust and credibility by personalizing that and speaking to your customer.
Yeah, excellent.
Very good.
More questions? All right, start in the back and then we'll work our way forward.
Hi. For me, listening to a couple of things that just want to make sure the nomenclature means the same thing. So, Gene, you just mentioned about that personalization of data. And your example you just gave, and you gave an example earlier regarding how you were comparing two offices with ICE or immigration. One processes their cases in 5 months, 2 months, and how that's personalized. And then, Andy, you were talking about how the customer segmentation. So I just want to make sure I'm using these words or I'm getting what I think I'm learning here. Is that one and the same, or they're interchangeable, or they're different, and there's a nuance that I'm not getting?
Sure, I can start with the personalization if
Go
that's
ahead.
okay. So what we mean by personalization is that we're not just giving you a generic answer. Your case is being processed. That would not be a personalized experience. The personalized experience is, hello, Andy, your case at the Los Angeles field office is in process. Because you came in for your biometrics appointment, you only have 30 more days until the next phase of your case processing. That is personalized to the customer, using the data we know about the customer and using the data we know about the business and what's going on the business side.
Yeah. And I'll address the segmentation question. What we mean by that is rather than looking at the individual customers, I'm looking at overall the decisions people are making as far as how they're getting to the airport, what they do while they're at the airport, what decisions they're making on what they purchase, whether they go into the gate. We can see, what they're doing there based upon what they're telling us. And again, it's not individual customers. We're looking at just in general what kind of patterns we're seeing. And I think that's even, for that purpose, it's even more valuable for us than getting an individual customer.
Right, so maybe, if my metaphor is way off, correct me, but it's the difference between using the same data pools and collection methods to get to the snowflake or the snowdrift.
Yeah.
And both are important.
That's a very good analogy.
Excellent. We had another one up here.
My question is to Andy. With the veteran experience, dealing with the veterans, and often the veterans look at their spouses to deal with the technology. I'm a wife of a service-disabled vet, but I also, one of my business clients are veterans who have small businesses. I get them verified to do government contracts. Their frustrations with any of the IT solutions they have to deal with, sometimes you have to make it a little easier for the people that are supporting them to get through the processes. That's just a comment.
I agree 100%. And we just had a conversation around how do our private sector healthcare providers interact with VA? Well, they need their own portal. They're a user group, and we have to go out and do research with them to make sure that we're building solutions that meet their needs. So I agree 100%.
Yeah, it's one of those things that gets lost in this discussion a lot, right? CX is about the end customer, but if you're not doing it for everyone along the way, it's never going to be good for the end customer, right?
Exactly.
Your internal customers are just as important, and your partners as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Got time for one more. And if it's quick, maybe we can sneak in one after that.
I'll answer fast.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that, I myself am a veteran, and I, of course, use the services. When you say that because the VA is such a significantly large enterprise, and that's where the pain point comes, how are they looking at holistically bringing that entire enterprise around at some point? Because being a veteran that came from Florida that's now in DC, I'm finding I have to reach out to Florida all the time and request hard copy papers and CDs still to bring them into the DC system. So how do you look at as an enterprise to bring holistically your entire enterprise together to make sure that your customers are experiencing everything they need to experience?
Sure. So I have two answers to that. The first is that the Veterans Experience Office is working really hard on being that cross-enterprise group that's looking globally at the customer experience. And we work closely with them on where can digital provide some solutions to our customer pain points, and where can service design provide solutions to some of our customer pain points. The second answer, I lost my train of thought.
If
I'm going to come back.
Maybe quickly reframe just as we wrap up here. So how do you bring the entire enterprise along? Because you've got all these paper processes and all these other things going on. At some point, there has to be a tipping point for VA where it goes from a bad customer experience that's very paper and tangibly based to one that is digital and works well. How do you bring the whole organization through instead of just fixing small
I know
issues?
what I wanted to say. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
So CX, right? So you have all these touch points. Service design is the offline world. UX design is the online world. Digital is not a panacea, right? Digital is not going to solve all of our customer experience problems. What digital can do is move fastest because it's leaner and it's more agile and it is cheaper. And as an example, you look at healthcare taxonomies. So if we look at the global customer experience of a VA patient, as you mentioned, we need to use the same vocabulary, the same naming conventions for everything from prescription refills to pharmacies. So here's where digital comes in. We're working on a pilot project to redesign a VA hospital website. There are more than 100 VA hospital systems. And we are testing the taxonomy of health services with veterans and their family members. I've never heard of an architect testing the building wayfinding signage with veterans and family members. So digital can just move fast and deliver solutions. And so the hope is that then the digital solutions put the burden on the offline world so that the architects start using our nomenclature. So that at every touch point for going to see a cardiologist, we're using the word cardiologist and heart care to make the veteran experience better.
So if I could, the answer to your specific issue is not necessarily digitizing that paper form right away. It's creating an ecosystem where it's moving in that direction, and that form becoming digitized will be a result, not necessarily a specific.
Yeah, listen, the dream is Apple, right? Like I can order an iPad online and pick it up in store. I can order it in the store and ship it to my vacation home. I can find out the status of that shipment online, or I can call Apple, and it is a consistent customer experience no matter the channel or the device or the medium.
Excellent.
Very good.
And that is definitely our time. So please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you.